Hello, I'm Lori Ann Lumbee with Soul School, and this is Soul Lessons. Our lessons this week focus on the topic of conditioning and how conditioning can get in the way of our ability to live our truth in our life. This video specifically addresses the topic of discernment. Discernment is a critically important skill as we're moving through the unfolding of our soul and our journey towards self-actualization. Discernment is the process through which we identify what's our truth and what's a truth that is not ours. Another way of describing that might be a process through which we identify what's life-giving and what's not. Or, as St. Ignatius would call it, who developed, or I should say identified the process of discernment, studied it, and articulated it as an important part of our psycho-spiritual development. St. Ignatius of Loyola described discernment as determining the voice of God versus the voice of the adversary. Each and every one of us bears within ourselves our own unique truth. Whether we call that God or soul or presence or simply our highest self. We know who we are, why we're here, what our gifts are, and how we are called to live out that unique giftedness. Of course, it takes a lifetime to identify the fullness of that truth. But that voice of truth is within us. That voice of truth leads us to freedom, to liberation, to experience the fullest expression of who we are, why we're here, and what we came here to do and be. We can know that voice because it gives us a sense of expansion within ourselves. It leads us towards what is life-giving and loving and supportive and kind. That inner voice leads us to fulfillment. It leads us to joy and contentment and peace. It guides us through the brambles of the human experience so that we might pierce through the fears and the distractions of this experience to find that deep, still, silent, quiet, peaceful place within ourselves. That voice of inner truth is that which guides our path. It is that which calls to us what we need for our soul's fulfillment. It is that voice that begins the stirrings of longing and yearning that sometimes shows up as impatience and frustration when we are not on the path of our truth. It is that voice that makes us feel restless or unfulfilled or dissatisfied, or which flat out pulls the rug out from underneath us when we have strayed from the path of our truth, the path of our soul. The alternative voice is the voice of what some have called the adversary. Now, we've already had a video here on the adversary, so I invite you to revisit that video if you haven't done so already. The adversary we're speaking of here comes in two forms. One is the adversary of our conditioning. That voice of the outside perceived authority, in whatever form that authority has taken, that has told us how to live, how to be, what to believe, the way we should move about our life experience. That adversary is also the inner voice of doubt, confusion, fear. That voice of the adversary, the voice that is not our truth, can be identified in anxiety, worry, confusion, doubt. It can show up in fretfulness, in rumination, in preoccupations. It can show up with the voice of our conditioning. All of those shoulds. If you don't do this, this is what will happen to you. And the very real conditioned fear of defying that external, outside perceived authority. In the process of discernment, we pay attention to those competing voices. And we're looking for what St. Ignatius calls consolation versus desolation. Desolation is the voice of the adversary. It's that voice that wants to keep us small, keep us imprisoned by the status quo and by societal conditioning. Consolation is the voice that calms the heart, that leads us to freedom, that gives us peace. Now, that is not to say that hearing the voice of our truth might not freak us out, because it might. I remember in hearing some of the inner guidance in my own life, the guidance that had required me at the time to step outside of what I knew, to leave behind a community that I had associated with belonging and acceptance, a community that had identified and initially lauded and celebrated, empowered my gifts. It's the same voice that told me when it was time to be done with a relationship. Both of those crossroads were terrifying, and there were many fears that I had to overcome and conditioning that I had to move through. But listening to that inner voice has led me to liberation and peace. Discernment is the process through which we identify the voice of our truth. And in identifying the voice of our truth, becoming obedient to that voice and being led freely and hopefully to the path of our truth and our true fulfillment. I'm Lorianne Lumbee, and this was Soul Lessons. If you found this to be helpful, please like and subscribe. Please share this video with others. And if you want to learn more about what we have to offer at Soul School, please check out our website, www.loriannlumbee.com. The link is posted below. We have online courses and training, mentorship, an online community, and many other resources to help support you in your soul's unfolding and in your journey towards self-actualization.